The Book of Mormon, the keystone of the Mormon religion, has several historical problems. It describes several things that shouldn't be there, and one of those things are horses. Welcome, friends, enemies, and everyone in between, to my channel, The Masked Mormon. I am in fact the Masked Mormon.
Why are you wearing a mask? Were you burned by acid or something like that?
Oh no, it's just they're terribly comfortable. I think everyone will be wearing them in the future.
I am a Mormon who used to believe in the truth claims of the Mormon Church. I was truly a hardcore believer. Then, after a pretty intense faith crisis, I realized that the church wasn't what it claimed to be. Now I talk about the implications of Mormon doctrine, history, and some of my own personal experiences on the internet with you fine viewers. The Book of Mormon claims to be a historical account of several groups of people that came from the Middle East, being led by God, to the Americas. Once here, they established a vast and complex Christian civilization that eventually fell to internal strife and war. The account was claimed to be translated by Mormonism's founder, Joseph Smith. But the book contains several anachronisms. An anachronism is something that is placed out of its appropriate time. For instance, if there was a historical account of Abraham Lincoln reading the Gettysburg Address from his iPhone, you would know that it would be a fictional or even a fraudulent account. A more subtle anachronism, also including Abraham Lincoln, would be if he was talking to an advisor, then as he turned to leave the room, he turned a doorknob. You would know that this also would be incorrect because the doorknob wasn't invented until 1878, 13 years after his death. The Book of Mormon has many of these items that are out of time, but today I'm going to focus on horses in the Book of Mormon. Horses are mentioned 14 times in the Book of Mormon. The problem is that, though they evolved in the Americas, horses were extinct in North and South America at the time of the Book of Mormon claims to have happened. Before we continue, if you like what I do, please like and subscribe. Maybe even consider sharing this video. After this video is done, consider watching one of my other videos where I discuss the dubious historical setting for the opening chapters of the Book of Mormon. Now let's get back to it. The horse originally evolved in North America, eventually spreading to Asia and Europe. Then, between about 8,000 and 12,000 years ago, the horse went extinct in the Americas, along with a lot of other megafauna that lived here. Then, in the 15th century, the horse was reintroduced to the Americas, escaping from Spanish colonists, where they established large herds that spread through the continents. Because of how useful domesticated horses are, native people adopted the use of the horse and developed a very sophisticated horse culture. When white settlers in Joseph Smith's day encountered native people, they found them to be skilled horsemen, assuming that they had been riding horses since forever. So, Joseph incorporated horses into the Book of Mormon. In 2023, genetic and archaeological studies compared the DNA of modern horses from North and South America, Asia, and Europe with 12,000-year-old DNA samples from horses from Siberia and North America. All of the historic horses associated with native people were closely related to horses that originated in Spain. There was no evidence that these horses were closely related to the Siberian or extinct North American horses. The earliest historic horses in North America from the 1600s carried only Spanish horse DNA, while horses from the 1700s and 1800s also shared DNA from British horses. Like I said, the earliest introduction of horses into native populations occurred in the latter part of the 16th century in the southern United States and other Spanish colonies. By the 1600s, the use of the horse had spread across the Great Plains and the American Southwest. Archaeological evidence shows clear signs that these horses were kept in confinement, including in ceremonial practices, and most importantly, that these horses were ridden. This spread of the horse across the Great Plains occurred 2 centuries before Joseph Smith was born. Now, to put that into perspective, the United States was established as a nation less than 250 years ago. So by the time that Joseph Smith was born, native populations had been riding horses for a time interval about as long as the United States has existed. Now, church apologists stubbornly try to defend the Book of Mormon account, trying to make a case that the scientific community is just plain wrong. Now, when Joseph was translating the Book of Mormon, he would place a stone that he used for magical treasure hunting in a hat. And according to David Whitmer, quote, Joseph would put the seer stone into a hat and put his face in the hat, drawing it closely around his face to exclude the light. And in the darkness, the spiritual light would shine. A piece of something resembling parchment would appear, and on that appeared the writing. One character at a time would appear, and under it was the interpretation in English. Brother Joseph would read off the English to Oliver Cowdery, who was his principal scribe, and when it was written down and repeated to Brother Joseph to see if it was correct, then it would disappear and another character with the interpretation would appear. End quote. Now I bring this up because apologists at Fair Latter-day Saints will try to change the story of how Joseph claimed to translate the Book of Mormon. They will try to claim that he was inspired and didn't actually translate the book. That instead, it was, what do they say? It was a revelation. And as such, some of the word choice was up to him and the language that he was familiar with. However, the David Whitmer quote really demolishes this attempt to obfuscate the issue. If God was magically making the correct words appear on the stone in the hat, there would be no room for mistranslation or error, especially if the word wouldn't disappear until it was written down correctly. So, horses must have meant horses, unless God can't give the correct word to Joseph through his stone. The domestication of animals is one of the most important developments humanity made. But not all animals can be domesticated. There are surprisingly few animals that can be. A good candidate animal for domestication usually has 5 traits. The first is that they have a social structure that we can utilize or exploit. The second is how selective the animals are of their mates. The third is how easily the animals bond with their young and how independent or mobile the young are at birth. The fourth is how flexible the diet of the animal is and how resistant that they can be to habitat change. And the fifth is how they respond to humans. Horses were domesticated, but why weren't zebras? From the book Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jared Diamond, he says that horses bond into herds with a lead stallion, and they respond to fear by running away, but they're not insane when they do it. Zebras, on the other hand, prefer small groups and don't bond to a lead stallion. Also, zebras are pretty vicious, and they attack threats. Sometimes the largest source of injuries on safaris are when zebras will bite you. The domestication issue for animals typically requires a few features. Predators are great for domestication. They have low fear levels. For wolves, for instance, they have a wonderful social system that mankind was able to subvert for our own purposes. For cats, they just kind of stopped being afraid of us. For larger herbivores, mankind generally needs a herd animal that bonds to a strong leader, whether it's a male or a female, which we can supplant. Though a moose might seem like a good candidate for domestication, they aren't herd animals. and deer or antelope don't bond with the leader. Hence, those two animals don't really make good candidates for domestication. It's also helpful to have animals that aren't aggressive, like zebras or rhinos, and that don't have a high fear response that can't be subverted. Again, like antelope or deer, which will dash themselves to death in fear. Reindeer are a notable exception to this. Zebras are individually tameable, but they never really bonded as a group to people. And they're hard to keep calm and focused, and tend to be more vicious than is helpful for a riding animal. There are surprisingly few animals that can be successfully domesticated. In Eurasia, these animals are the horse, cattle, sheep, goats, pigs, cats, camels, reindeer, yaks, donkeys or mules, camels, water buffalo, chickens, ducks, and geese. In the Americas, the list of domesticated animals are llamas, alpacas, guinea pigs, ducks, turkeys, dogs, and macaws. This is a much shorter list, and the animals are on average much smaller than the Eurasian list. And there are no heavy draft animals, or animals that are good for riding. Though llamas are used as pack animals, the difference in size and weight of a llama compared to, say, a horse, is quite substantial, making them unsuitable for riding. Now, why would I bring up the history of domestication and whether llamas can be ridden? It's because we have a pretty good grasp on what animals existed where and when and who used them, and for what. This is really not some unknown question mark where we're waiting for more information. The discovery of pre-Columbian horses during the time of the Book of Mormon would be momentous in the fields of archaeology, paleontology, history, and so many other fields. The domestication of the horse was a huge technological development for humanity. Their speed and power was something that built empires all across Europe. The Native Americans immediately saw their utility and capitalized on it. The horse is not a technology that would just be forgotten and lost into the depths of time. They're just too useful. But apologists are desperate to find anything that might prop up their claims and their faith. But no amount of mental gymnastics gets around a clear reading of the Book of Mormon and what it means. The apologists will try to claim that Joseph really meant a tapir or a deer when he says horse. Recently, apologists are trying to claim a vindication because horse bones found in Mexico have been radiocarbon dated to the time of the Book of Mormon. Again, if this were true, this would be a paradigm-shifting discovery. The results of this study were published in a journal called the Texas Journal of Science. This was done in 2022 by author Wade Miller, a retired geologist from BYU and a Book of Mormon apologist. So, let's check out to see if the claim holds water. There seems to be several red flags that call into question the author's claims. Let's look at some of them. Well, the first thing is that the author himself, Wade Miller, has spoken at several Mormon apologetic conferences. And being a retired BYU professor, he likely has a belief already in the Book of Mormon, and a belief in where it took place. This can be a conflict of interest, though it's not necessarily disqualifying. But you can ask the question, do mainstream researchers agree with his assessments? Again, this would be an earth-shaking discovery that would redefine several fields of study. The next issue is that his paper was published in an obscure journal. The Texas Journal of Science is not a mainstream journal. It has a low impact factor, meaning it's not cited by other reputable journals or researchers. A major paradigm-shifting paper needs to be published in major journals that all scientists can read. The paper claims to perform radiocarbon dating on the horse bones. However, upon closer examination, they didn't actually radiocarbon test the bones themselves, but they tested charcoal and wood that was next to the bones. Now, just because there was wood next to these bones doesn't mean that they were there at the same time. For radiocarbon dating, the process should have been to isolate collagen from the horse bones and to test that. If you can't do that, then you're kind of at the mercy of environmental contamination that will skew the results. And this is actually what occurred. The author was in fact aware of the problem and even admitted it in the paper. But Book of Mormon apologists, desperate for evidence that supports the Book of Mormon, conveniently ignore these details. And ultimately, the truth doesn't matter to apologists. This paper will support their dubious claims for decades to come because their dodgy conclusions align with their beliefs. But what are your thoughts? Is there more compelling evidence for horses in the Americas during Book of Mormon times? What other anachronisms really stick out? Are there any others that you would like me to cover in a future video? Let me know down in the comments. And if you like what I do, please press the like button and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.